Hi, and welcome to the Law Center videocast. I'm your host and founder of the Law Center, Larry DeMarco. Thank you for joining us this evening. Please join us every Tuesday night at 7, and you can participate in the chat room with other viewers. Today, we have a repeat guest, Randy Flood, a practicing psychologist in Michigan since '92, and the co-founder of the Men's Resource Center of Western Michigan. Randy, thanks for coming back and joining us again.
Hey, thanks for having me, Larry.
Randy, I understand you're a speaker and media consultant. If you were to talk to give a keynote address to a bunch of dads, what would your core message be?
I would want to encourage men to not want to harken back to the older days and make kind of a making fathers great again kind of motif and help them be incentivized and encouraged to see that they can evolve into a 21st century father. And I would explain to them in my workshop what that looks like and sounds like. And again, empowering them and encourage them to evolve, transcend, and transform themselves into better versions of being a father in the challenging world of the 21st century.
Randy, I know you work with dads and you said workshop. Is that something online where even viewers who are maybe in Pennsylvania or California could join you or sign up for?
We offer online coaching and consultation. We have specialized groups for men, support groups, men who are struggling with domestic abuse, anger management, pornography addiction, sex addiction. And we also even have a parental awareness support group for men who are struggling with parental alienation as a rejected dad. So no specific classes per se at this point, but a lot of group work and support groups with other men.
And is that also one-on-one? Are you available for that as well?
Yep, one-on-one consultations and coaching, as well as offering group work.
So how else, when you say evolve and 21st century man, what do you want to see? What do you find problems do you find them slipping into? And how do you help them be that modern 21st man?
Well, I see them wanting to take the rightful place in the family alongside of mothers, alongside of co-parents, rather than an old school way of patriarchy. I think I look back at some of the great authors that the recent author who passed away, Bell Hooks, who's an African-American feminist. And I like this quote that she said in her book, The Will to Change. I have it here in front of me because I wanted to use this because I knew we were going to be talking about this today. She said, the first act of violence patriarchy demands of males is not violence toward women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. So it's just notion that, and we talk about it in the book Mascopathy, Understanding and Healing the Malaise of American Manhood, where there's this socialization process historically, and the American Psychological Association has also recognized this to be a mental health issue for men, is that we don't raise young boys into emotional intelligence and relational skills, and we pummel those softer tissues out of them in the name of kind of being this real man. And then they come into 21st century economics and family democratic systems, and they're not able to be fit and able to function in a way that makes them skilled and ready. And so then they harken back to some older paradigm where maybe it's more hierarchical, and then they see it as competition and kind of my right, and it's a zero-sum game with women and feminists, rather than seeing we're all in it together to raise children.
So if I was a man who said, look, I also do this, I'm in that antiquated patriarchal role, and I want to do right by my son. Practically, what can I do? What steps can I take?
Well, first, I would want you to see that you need to work on your own emotional health and mental health, because if you're raised in that old, antiquated paradigm, then it stands to reason that you're going to struggle, as I see a lot of the men that I work with just basic emotional intelligence and being able to have emotional resources, know what emotions I'm having, how to manage them appropriately, how to talk about them, how to have relationship skills, to talk about it with my boy. And I think it's more of a self project to begin with. And then once you work on yourself, then you're going to be able to have these skills and the knowledge and the awareness to start mentoring and educating your son in that new type of masculinity.
So suppose I've told you that my dad was that way. He was a stern disciplinarian and not a talker. And we weren't close and I couldn't discuss things with him. So where would I start? For me to be a better father for my son, I want to raise my son differently. Is there any exercise, or how would you talk me through that? Is there something that you could advise me for being more available emotionally during my parenting time with my son?
Right.
Or daughter.
Right. Well, Susan Flutie has this quote. She says, men's task is not in the end to figure out how to be masculine. Rather, their masculinity lies in figuring out how to be human. You know, so it's just, again, there's so many. There's the Mankind Project, for example. That's an international men's movement that gives you a weekend opportunity to do work on yourself. There's counseling locally in your probably in your region. There's online, since the pandemic is created this explosion of online resources for people who don't have maybe proper mental health resources in their community. There's books to read. Awakening from the Deep Sleep by Robert Pasick is a classic men's book, or Man Enough by Frank Pittman. I could just list you hundreds of books. I Don't Want to Talk About It by Terry Real. Right? There's all these books that we can read. We can do a self-study. We can go to retreats. We can go to counseling. There's many things, but one thing you can't do is do something very traditional as a man, which is to go it alone. That I'm just going to figure out how to pull my bootstraps up and figure out how to evolve and change all on my own. The AA movement back in the 1940s was founded on this idea that alcoholics, for example, can't get better and can't recover doing it alone. They need to do it as a collective with other people around the table. And I think it's similar in these kind of journeys. And faith communities are doing a better job creating groups for men to get together and talk about fathering and challenges of balancing work and home and things like that. So there's hopefully opportunities at your disposal once you become curious and interested and inquisitive, which is the first step. You got to be enlightened and say, hey, I have to do this work. Then you start searching for resources.
So do you notice some common recurrent themes for men in their struggle, a repeating maybe pitfall or hang up that they have in their family relationships?
Yeah, I think that what we have found is that men tend to be action oriented, and they have a particular gear that they go into that is really an important gear. To move the tires, right? It's like when you're at a stoplight in a car, you take the foot off the gas and you put the brakes on. And now we've got these really smart cars that the engine even shuts off. So there's these ways in which we are building products that are versatile and flexible. We need to build men that are versatile and flexible, so they don't have that one gear where they only think that the only thing they could do is fix something and take action. Sometimes you just got to sit, shut up, and listen. And just be there, holding space for your children, holding space for your intimate partner, and listening. And maybe the action and solution-focused plan comes down the way, but they're more likely to hear and join you in that process when they know that you've heard them and that you can listen and that you can empathize. So I think the biggest thing I try to teach men is looking at family relationships, intimate relationships, and fathering is a skills-based process. And you have to learn the skills to do that, just like you learn the skills to be a lawyer, to be an accountant, to be a plumber, to be a mechanic. You had to go to school. You had to be mentored. You had to be trained. You had to read books and manuals. That is how you need to approach fathering and being an intimate partner. You can't just assume that because you were raised in a family through osmosis and observation, you're just going to miraculously become a great human being. You have to work on yourself and see that a lot of it is about what is going on in my inner life in terms of my emotions, my ideas, my beliefs, my thoughts, my attitudes, my values, rather than just always externalize and focusing on what do I need to change out there.
Speaking of resources, Randy, you wrote a book about, what is it, Mascopathy? Something that could help men. You did write something. Tell us about your book.
I wrote two books, co-authored two books with my author, Charlie Donaldson. The first one was Stop Hurting the Woman You Love, Breaking the Cycle of Abusive Behavior. That's a self-help book for men who struggle in intimate relationships with being a little controlling, being a little abusive, or severely so. And we see that as a heterogeneous population, and we give you tests to take so you can find out what your triggers are and how to help yourself. Secondly, we wrote a book called Mascopathy, Understanding and Healing the Malaise of American Manhood. And that was a follow-up to talk about how we see how some masculinity can get distorted, unbalanced, unhealthy. We call it all kinds of names because I think we have a problem with no name. We just argue about what to call it. Some people call it toxic masculinity. Some people call it hegemonic masculinity. I heard another one called radicalized masculinity. So there's all kinds of...
seems to be the most frequent, toxic masculinity.
Toxic. And people get upset when they hear that because what they hear you saying that masculinity inherently is toxic. And that's not what people are saying. Some people might be saying that, but most people are saying just like there are toxic forms of water and air and food, and we need to make sure that we go out there and make sure that food and water and air is safe and clean and healthy. And we need to understand what makes it toxic when we have certain pollution and such. Same thing with masculinity. Masculinity is beautiful, wonderful energy. We want to keep it, grow it, we want to inculcate our boys with it and girls. But we have to be careful that it doesn't get extreme, exaggerated, distorted, unbalanced, toxic. And that's what we work on with a lot of people who come to us at the Men's Resource Center. Is they're looking for a more balanced masculinity, a more healthy masculinity. We help them find it in our groups and with other men, and they become journeymen to discover how to have a more healthy masculinity.
The other resource that I would suggest to the viewers, one of my favorite books, Warren Farrell's The Boy Crisis. And he may have others, but that particularly helped me, The Boy Crisis. So that's another that I would recommend to viewers. Do you have any other favorites that helped you that you've read?
Well, I mentioned some. There's always a classic, Iron John by Robert Bly, which is the beginning of the mythopoetic men's movement back in the 80s. He just recently passed too. There's a lot. To Be a Man is another book out there. I can't remember the author right offhand. There is, there's a lot of really
so
good
it's
books
out there. You don't have to look hard if we're committed to finding this.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
I know you've been an expert. I know you are an expert in family court. What changes or reform would you like to see in the family court system?
Well, a lot, but it's a human institution, and there's a lot of moving parts, and so it's hard to see changes happen in our lifetime quickly. I think it happens over a long arc of justice is kind of moves, but it just takes a while. I mean, I think affordable access to justice for, because there's this phrase, how much justice can you afford? and, to hiring good attorneys, hiring good experts to be able to argue your point, and especially with complex resist and refuse dynamics, where there's allegations of parental alienation or allegations of domestic violence or both. It's hard for someone to do a quick investigation without a lot of training and come up with findings that are really going to give the judge guidance. And so I think that training for court personnel, more access to reliable and thorough and good evaluations, early intervention, I think is critical. I think time is of the essence, and a lot of times these cases just are protracted. And they take a long time to get court dates. They take a long time to get good mental health professionals trained, and that is a problem.
You mentioned early intervention. Are you referring to parental alienation?
Yes, for sure. In parental alienation, even in domestic violence, you want early intervention. But with parental alienation, time is your enemy, because the longer you allow the dynamic to bake in the oven, shall we say, the longer it's just gonna get crystallized and more difficult to intervene and break up and have success in reducing the alienation dynamics.
How could family court reform advocates help improve the system? Meaning, if someone wanted to get involved or wanted to fight for a change, what advice would you give that person?
Well, it depends on what angle you're coming from. I think that I have a love-hate relationship with advocates, meaning that sometimes advocates are, for reasons that are to organize them into a collective, to have a mission and initiative, they have this narrow focus to address domestic violence, or a narrow focus to address parental alienation, or mental health issues with parenting fitness. I like approaches of, like, that's one thing I like about being an evaluator, is because we get to take the approach of being a scientist and having multiple hypotheses as to what's going on in a particular family. And I think where advocates come in is that they come in sometimes thinking they're advocating for, oh, this is a case of domestic violence, or this is a case of parental alienation. And what ends up happening is I discover them as negative advocates. When I do an evaluation, they're actually advocating, for example, a parent who alleges domestic violence, and my findings is that they're an alienating parent, and they're using that to weaponize mental health professionals and advocates to be able to obfuscate their alienation tactics. And similarly, some person might claim that it's alienation when in fact there was domestic violence or child abuse and neglect, and they're trying to obfuscate their abusive, neglectful behavior by claiming they're being unduly rejected and they're a good parent. And so I run into advocates a lot who are actually weaponized and become negative advocates.
So it's important to understand to make sure that the best of intentions aren't weaponized or abused for people with bad intentions.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think I think we need advocates. I think advocates who can help look at structuring family court in such a way that early intervention, early diagnostic assessments to find out what is going on in families, so that then that diagnosis or that conclusion through an impartial forensic process can then direct the mental health professionals and the judge with future motions and petitions to be able to know what the dynamics are in that family and how to best address it, and what kind of counseling, what kind of interventions are needed, rather than you end up with contraindicated interventions sometimes because you don't know what's going on.
What are some of your biggest challenges in working with families in the family court arena?
Well, I think that they sometimes don't understand that when they are in the family court arena, that they're not the only client. if they've had an experience with traditional mental health counseling, they get HIPAA on board and they have releases of information signed about who has access to their records and who has access to their information. When you enter the family court in a forensic psychological environment, then you now have the court as part of the clients, is the client of the mental health professional, as well as the people coming in who are court ordered. So rules around confidentiality and such are not applicable as much. And so sometimes families frown upon that or get frustrated by that, and they see as though we're betraying them. But that's just the nature of forensic psychology and family court and mental health intersecting. And so explaining that to families is part of my orientation when I first see them, to make sure they understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what has been some of your biggest accomplishments or successes in your career?
Well, I think one of them I think of right off the top of my head is that, and again, I'm going to knock on wood, Larry, is that I haven't been sued as in a malpractice. If you look at forensic psychology, there's a high likelihood of being sued because you're dealing with litigants and you're dealing with people who get very upset about your recommendations or your work with the family, and they feel like they are not being seen correctly by you or whatnot as a father or a mother, and you're not secure in the best interest of the children. But I think that the reason I haven't is because I really am fastidious about the forensic protocol and making sure I follow the industry standards, because that is what gives me a safety net. If someone doesn't like my findings, they typically will go after me as am I credentialed? Am I trained enough? And I am now. I've been doing this since 1992. So they have a hard time attacking me and saying that I'm not properly trained or credentialed. And then the other thing they go after is the protocol. Did you stay in your lane? Did you use the standards of the industry? And I just am really fastidious about doing that, because not only is it important in terms of having the best chance of finding out what truth and justice is, but it also insulates me from someone pointing their finger and saying, look, he was unethical. He didn't use the proper standards. So that's one of my successes.
Randy, are you interested in writing any more articles in the kitty that we can look forward to?
Oh yeah. I have a book in the oven, when it comes to a self-help book for rejected and targeted parents in parental alienation. And I've written some articles about it, as you know, we've talked about earlier, that they can find on my website, themenscenter.org, about 5 common mistakes that rejected parents make. And I'm going to turn that into a book where I'm going to be talking about other things that rejected and targeted parents face, and educate them about the no-win double binds that they get into. And there's lots of other ideas to help them and empower them, enlighten them, so that they can have the best opportunity to approach a very difficult and insidious and toxic process, which is parental alienation.
Randy, does parental alienation happen by accident? I mean, if we're in a high conflict situation, could we be, even if we're facing it, also be part of the problem or contributing to it in any way?
Yeah, I think that we can have high conflict, and there can be times where, for example, there could be hybrid cases where you have some rejected, you have some abuse and neglect going on, lack of parental fitness, and then you have a parent who comes in truly not as an obstructive gatekeeper, but as a protective gatekeeper. And so sometimes that can then transition into what we call, or Leslie Droz and Olson call counterproductive protective parenting, where they're actually now have a motivation and an intention of protecting, but it's counterproductive because it's no longer necessary, or their fears have now become irrational because there's been rehabilitation or what have you. So I do think that there are times that there are errors made by the one parent, and then the rejected parent can also make mistakes. And that's why I want to write a book to help them, is because they oftentimes feel misunderstood and they struggle with being angry and irritable and accusatory to mental health professionals. And then they end up playing into the image of this angry, difficult parent, when actually they're being victimized by parental alienation. And they need to learn how to cope with those feelings and more strategically approach the court and mental health professionals rather than doing it from a place of reactivity.
Randy, this information will also be in the description portion of this video, but in case someone is driving and can't look there now, how can we learn more about you or get more information about the things that you do?
Probably the best way would be access the websites, and then there's contact information within those, www.menscenter.org, menscenter.org. You will find a podcast there that called Revealing Men. We have coaching and consultation and specialized services, family court, criminal court, as well as specialized services for men groups, support groups. And then the Fountain Hill Center .org, www.fountainhillcenter.org also is a website where I'm on, and my colleagues who work in family court specialized services. And they can find us there through emailing us, and there's contact information, phone numbers, and such.
Well, Randy, let's leave it there. And I want to thank you for being a guest on the Law Center Videocast.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
A repeat guest, of course.
Yes.
We've been here with Randy Flood, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you can be alerted of all my new videos. Please check the description portion of this video where you can learn more about Randy and the Law Center. Signing off. Tune in next time. Bye for now.